Much like the film it was based off of, which is hailed as one of the greatest superhero movies of all time, the Spider-Man 2 game, released in 2004, is widely regarded as one of the best video games ever produced, centering around our friendly neighborhood wall crawler. But after 16 plus years since it came out, does it still deserve that distinction? Does nostalgia play too heavily into these beliefs, blinding people towards some of the game's flaws? To a certain degree, I think so. For many of us, it's been years since we've played this game. A lot of us probably don't remember much of the negatives associated with it, focusing mainly on the positives, the good stuff. And I mean, I don't blame you. That's kind of how nostalgia works. But my goal with this video is to try to take a very neutral stance with everything, leave my personal nostalgia at the door as best I can, and provide you guys with a very objective video review. Now, of course, I will be sharing many of my personal opinions and feelings towards this game too, that's a given, but I'm not just going to gush over it the whole time. The game isn't as perfect and flawless as the vast majority of the internet makes it out to be at times, and again, I think nostalgia plays a huge factor in that. Before I get into the nitty-gritty, I will just go out and say that yes, Spider-Man 2, as a game, as a superhero story, still holds up rather well, and yes, I still believe it's one of the best Spider-Man games of all time. How does it compare to the other titles on that list, though, after 16 years? Well, let's take a look and see. Spider-Man 2 expands upon the story depicted in the film. It centers around Peter having to balance his personal life with being Spider-Man, and all the problems associated with living these two identities. He struggles with his schooling, always late or absent from class, managing his responsibilities, working for the Daily Bugle newspaper, and finds it difficult to make it on time to see his friends, Mary Jane Watson and Harry Osborn. Being a hero, being Spider-Man, gets in the way of being Peter Parker, and the game really nails this idea. The strength of the Spider-Man 2 game's story is really the same strength that the film had, this focus on Peter's double life, having him forced to balance his civilian life with being Spider-Man. The focus on this balance, on these personal dilemmas, is the heart of the Spider-Man character. It's what made the comic so likable, relatable in the first place, and it's why this game works so well, why it's such a great Spider-Man story. Now, comparing it to the film, the game is missing one key element, the moment when Peter loses his powers and stops being Spider-Man, referencing the events from the iconic 1967 storyline, Spider-Man No More. But I think we can all understand why this was not featured in the game, because that wouldn't be fun to play. You want to be Spider-Man. You want to be able to swing around the city and beat up bad guys, not hang around on the streets for hours on end as Peter Parker. So yeah, the game doesn't include a part that has Peter lose his powers. It doesn't stop you from being Spider-Man, because that would suck. But what it does do, in its place, that the film didn't, is provide us with a morally corrupt element, an unrighteous component that draws Peter to the dark side, if you will, pulling him closer to the idea of being Spider-Man full-time and essentially giving up on being Peter Parker, which I find to be very fascinating. Peter has a crush on Mary Jane Watson. He wants to be with her. But as long as Spider-Man is in the equation, he's constantly letting MJ down, and eventually she slips through his fingers and decides to marry astronaut John Jameson. Enter Black Cat, the master thief Peter is introduced to when he stops a museum robbery earlier in the game. You encounter her several times throughout the narrative, chasing her down in cat-and-mouse sequences on rooftops. She aids you in locating and taking down super criminals such as Herman Schultz, the Shocker, and at one point even uses you as a distraction so she can swipe a rare gold statue being stolen by some criminals. Throughout this story, Black Cat tries to persuade Peter to give up his civilian life in favor of being Spider-Man, the exact opposite of what the film tries to do. She wants him to forget about all of his responsibilities and just have fun with his powers, realize how special and superior he is to everyone else. Of course, it doesn't work, and Peter is able to focus on what really matters. But the fact that this game manages to discuss the central themes of Spider-Man 2, do it in a way that incorporates elements from the film, but also provide us with something different too, I think that's really impressive, especially for a movie licensed game released in 2004. On top of all the stuff discussing responsibility, Spider-Man 2 obviously incorporates Dr. Octopus into the story as well. He was the villain of the movie after all. In the game, the origin of Otto Octavius is basically the same as the film. He is a nuclear scientist who creates a powerful fusion experiment funded by Oscorp, hoping that the unlimited energy it creates can be used to power New York City. He miscalculates, however, and the fusion reaction becomes unstable. Spider-Man is able to stop it, but not before it kills Otto's wife Rosie, and destroys the inhibitor chip, which blocks the robotic arms used in the experiment from taking over Octavius's nervous system with their artificial intelligence. Otto becomes the villain Dr. Octopus and confronts his friend and scientific colleague Kurt Connors, telling him that he intends on recreating the experiment. He steals money from the Bank of Manhattan to fund its reconstruction, and then goes to Harry Osborn in order to get the fuel for the fusion reactor, the isotope known as tritium. In exchange for it, Harry orders Otto to find and capture Spider-Man, whom he blames for the death of his father, and wants to kill firsthand. This leads to MJ being kidnapped by Dr. Octopus to draw out Spider-Man, a fight on a subway train, much like the epic one in the film, and the final confrontation between the hero and villain at Otto's waterfront laboratory, resulting in Doc Ock's defeat, his sacrifice to shut down the fusion experiment once and for all, MJ learning of Spider-Man's secret identity, and her leaving John at the altar in favor of being with Peter. All is good in the end. What this game does with Dr. Octopus and how it adapts the events of the movie is pretty damn good for a game at the time on PS2. His motivations to fight Spider-Man are essentially the same as the film. He does it so he can get the tritium to recreate his experiment. Also, because Spider-Man keeps getting in his way, and he blames him for the death of his wife Rosie, though clearly he is just blinded to the fact that his own miscalculations resulted in that. At the end of the game, when you confront Doc Ock in his lab, and he learns that Spider-Man's true identity is Peter Parker, he goes one step beyond the movie, telling Spider-Man that he will kill MJ in revenge for him killing his wife. It's an eye for an eye. Fighting Doc Ock in Spider-Man 2 can be really fun and really challenging. In order to damage him, you have to first web down all of his robotic tentacles, pinning them to the ground so you can go in for a few haymakers. You are constantly having to watch to see which tentacle is about to attack you. Be ready to hit the circle button and dodge it, and fast enough so you can then hit triangle to web it down. If you are too slow with any of these steps, you will either simply miss webbing it up and get the chance to run away or reposition yourself to try again, or the worst case scenario, be grabbed by one of them and take a fair bit of damage. Battling Doc Ock in this game keeps you on your toes. It can become quite nerve-wracking at times, mainly due to the fact that there is almost always outside interference in some way. In the bank fight, he brings multiple goons with him that fire these grenade launcher weapons at you, which you have to keep an eye on while avoiding Dr. Octopus, or take them out as quickly as possible so you can then focus all your attention on him for the remainder of the battle. The train sequence can also be distracting because you are battling Doc Ock on moving terrain. If at any point you are knocked off, you have to find your way back on, as the train makes its twists and turns, and then jump over the gaps on top to reach the villain and try the whole process all over again. The bend in the train closest to Dr. Octopus is always a pain as well, because for some reason you can't run over it and have to jump, which puts you in a vulnerable position for one of the arms to grab you. And finally, the last battle with Dr. Octopus in the rundown warehouse has Doc Ock utilize all 4 of his tentacles at the same time. The fight in the bank only used 2, because the other ones were allowing him to walk around and cling onto the walls and ceiling, and on the train, 2 of them were used to keep him grounded. By the game's end, you really have to have the dodging and webbing down, because you have to have all the tentacles trapped so you can attack Otto before the first one breaks free. So if you are too slow and keep missing your openings, you might find yourself in a constant ballet of dodging and webbing, with no end in sight. The boss battles with Dr. Octopus in Spider-Man 2 are still the best featuring him from any video game in my opinion. I know Insomniac's Spider-Man had a much larger and epic confrontation with him at the end of that game, but if you've seen my review of it, you would know that I was somewhat disappointed in it, because it seemed to focus more on the cinematic feel of everything and less on the actual gameplay. Here, in Spider-Man 2, it really pushes your gaming sensibilities to their limits, truly tests your spider reflexes. Yeah, this version of Dr. Octopus in video game form isn't as good as the one in Spider-Man from 2018, but gameplay-wise, he is far more engaging and challenging as an enemy. I hope you agree. Another one of the central antagonists in Spider-Man 2 is my main man Mysterio, and you knew I was going to talk about him in this video. I think the character is done amazing justice in this game, and the way Treyarch depicts the villain is quite brilliant. They make Mysterio appear to be an alien from outer space, leading an invasion of the planet Earth and terrorizing the citizens of New York City. Mysterio is just a man, a special effects artist named Quentin Beck, who would challenge Spider-Man to a series of games to prove himself superior to the Wallcrawler, proving that he is a fraud. After suffering an embarrassing defeat, Beck assumes the identity of Mysterio, this creature or otherworldly being taken right out of those classic science fiction space movies, and I think his design in this game makes sense. It would be something a special effects artist from the film industry would dress up as and use as a cover if they were to become a costumed supervillain. In the game, Quentin Beck provokes Spider-Man, forcing him to compete in a series of challenges at the sports arena, which I believe is supposed to be Madison Square Garden. Donning a costume similar to the one he had in the original comics, Beck flies around on a jetpack, and he and Spider-Man race each other to throw as many criminals into padded pits as possible in the allotted time, to show which one of them is better at rounding up criminals. Beck believes that if he wins, without superpowers, he will prove once and for all what a sham Spider-Man really is. If you get through the first challenge, you must then face off against Beck in a giant floating obstacle course, staying out of the path of the electric cannon he is controlling on the other side of the arena. Once you make it through the course, you win, and Beck is defeated. Later, he returns as Mysterio, in the form of a giant hologram, and attacks the Opera House, forcing Spider-Man to take on his mechanical robots and save the innocent people put in harm's way. At the Statue of Liberty, Beck uses advanced hologram technology to make it look as though aliens have tampered with the monument, turning it into a giant statue of Mysterio. Spidey makes his way to the top of it, takes out the brain, and puts an end to all the illusions. He then confronts Mysterio at his hideout, hidden deep within an unassuming apartment, only to find himself in some bizarre funhouse. At the end of it, he reveals Mysterio as the fraud, finding computer equipment and yet another hologram. It's at this point in the game that you think all of the stuff with Mysterio is over. For a while he isn't mentioned, and you go about your other hero business. That is until Mysterio decides to rob a convenience store, however, and you come face to face with him for the very first time. The game builds him up as this epic battle, showing you 3 separate health meters for Mysterio filling up. You think it's gonna be a real challenge, only for you to punch him once, and Beck falls right on his ass, giving himself up to Spider-Man, and being revealed as the one behind all the alien shenanigans. As much as I would have liked to see a standard boss fight with Mysterio, especially seeing as he is my favorite villain of all time, I think what they did with him here, essentially making him a joke at the end like that, was a lot of fun, and made his appearance in this game far more memorable than it would have been had he had your typical run-of-the-mill boss encounter. Quentin Beck in this game is very childish, a whiny bitch when he doesn't get his way, feeling everything is unfair. He wants to prove himself better than Spider-Man, wants to show the world how phony Spider-Man really is. In many ways, he is insecure about himself. Not having superpowers of his own makes him feel powerless, weak. So he spends a little money, fluffs up the myth a little bit with all these crazy visuals and eye candy, making him appear far greater than he really is, or how he feels he is deep down. But what makes it so funny is that all the challenges you face up until the moment in the convenience store, it's like Beck burned through all of his resources, blew his load, and he's bled white. He's got nothing left to offer. He's forced to get his hands dirty now, do stuff himself, but all he's really capable of is holding up some convenience store for what really boils down to peanuts at that point. He went from tampering with the Statue of Liberty, making it a statue of himself, to holding up a convenience store for chump change. It's hilarious. Not only does the joke battle with Mysterio work in terms of story, but I also think it works when you look at everything else going on in this game. Dr. Octopus takes center stage in terms of boss battles, with his being the most challenging hand-to-hand encounters you face. You've also got stuff with the Rhino and Shocker thrown in too. I don't know if having a Mysterio boss battle was entirely necessary. Not to mention, some of the challenges you do with Quentin Beck are fairly lengthy, and take up quite a large chunk of this game. They have multiple stages to them. The one at the Statue of Liberty specifically is probably the most frustrating part of this entire game too, at least for me. Swinging up to the top of the statue, making sure you connect with each floating device without falling into the water, it can be tricky maintaining the height you need all the way up. And once you get to the statue, you have to maneuver yourself around it, destroying these globes, to turn off a force field so you can attack the brain, all while dodging these spinning blades surrounding it. Yeah, it can be a real pain in the ass. I think following the whole Statue of Liberty brain thing, which basically acts as Mysterio's boss battle, let's be honest, the player is pretty worn out from all the challenges Beck had you face. I don't think they needed to add more to it and have some lengthy boss encounter thrown in on top of it. It was unnecessary. Besides, all of these challenges combined, they had some variety, and they were satisfying. I didn't really need anything more. The funny boss battle they included with Mysterio, it was great. It made his appearance in this game far more memorable than it would have been had they not done it, and it went against everyone's expectations. It was a fun surprise. And with that, this brings me to one of the biggest elements of this game that made it so revolutionary at the time of its release, a fully open-world New York City, one you could swing from and walk on. It was simply incredible. Prior to this game, 3D Spider-Man games had featured levels, sometimes involving interiors, but mostly taking place on rooftops. The city streets might have been visible or grayed out, but you couldn't walk on them. You would die if you got too close. Or in the case of Spider-Man 2, Enter Electro, there were moments you could walk on the streets, but they were within self-contained levels, only stretching a few blocks, if that. In Spider-Man 2, all of that changed, and for the first time ever, you really felt like Spider-Man navigating the city, and there was a lot to do in it. You had the main story sections, of course, but there were also various collectibles to keep you busy, and even side missions provided by civilians you could take on to earn hero points, allowing you to purchase a bunch of cool upgrades. As Spider-Man, you could also deliver pizzas, and oh boy, that pizza song, it still gets stuck in my brain. Let's talk about the web swinging in Spider-Man 2, because I have quite a bit to say about it. While I think it's fun, and it definitely has its charm, it was very addictive at the time, I feel it has aged pretty bad over the years, following the release of many other newer Spider-Man games. Your swings get interrupted constantly, whether you hit into a wall, scrape the top of a building, or make contact with the ground. It disrupts your flow and momentum at times, which can become quite annoying. You also have to manually latch onto a surface with a button press following a web zip, where most Spider-Man games now do that automatically, which is how it should be. Being that this was the first Spider-Man game to start using this more realistic web-swinging system, the developers really tried their best to make it the most realistic as possible, almost too realistic if you ask me. Not only does your web swinging get interrupted frequently, but your webs don't register and latch onto buildings as much as you'd want them to, because in this game, you really need something close by to connect to. If you're too far away, your webs won't work. Now, I know this is still a thing in Spider-Man games. You have to be close to surfaces in order to swing off of them. It makes sense. But a lot of the newer games utilize simple tricks and illusions, so to speak, to remove a lot of the more frustrating elements from web swinging. The flow of your momentum isn't interrupted nearly as much as it was in Spider-Man 2, nor do you find yourself clipping off walls or the ground as much either. Developers have found ways to make this system more accessible and simple, and it's why newer Spider-Man games are so much better in the web-swinging department than Spider-Man 2 was. I still enjoy Spider-Man 2's web-swinging system, but it is dated and rough around the edges. It was a solid foundation that later games would vastly improve upon. I think one aspect of Spider-Man 2 that makes me hate on the web swinging as much as I do is the fact that a lot of the story and side missions involve time limits, stopwatches that force you to get from point A to point B in such a hurry. Because you're in a rush, under pressure, you tend to make more mistakes, and the irritating elements I just mentioned regarding the web swinging just snowballs onto your already rising frustrations in some of these sequences. It's just not that fun. When I think of Spider-Man 2, I think of timers, time limits, because that's what you face almost as much as you're fighting the other villains in this game, like Doc Ock. The stopwatch is a supervillain in and of itself. Another weak point of this game are the side missions from civilians you are forced to do in order to earn hero points that allow you to progress in the story and get to the next chapter. While they may have been a fun little distraction back when this game came out, now they are very shallow, tedious, and extremely repetitive. As you progress through the story, a few mission types are thrown into the mix, but the vast majority repeat over and over again, saving some construction worker from falling, or taking them to the hospital before the clock strikes 0, retrieving stolen items taken by a group of thugs, stopping a car chase, that sort of thing. Again, back in the day, this stuff was a lot of fun, and made you feel like a real hero, Spider-Man coming to the rescue and helping these civilians with the problems they had. But I find these missions have aged terribly, and are easily the weakest aspect of this game, in my opinion. The civilians are so robotic, the voice acting is subpar, and the actual tasks you are sent out to do are rarely interesting, especially after you do them 50 times. The main story missions are where this game shines. It's just unfortunate that in order to get to each one of them, each new chapter, you have to complete several of these dull and monotonous side missions to earn enough hero points. Now mind you, for most of this game, after you complete the main story mission in each chapter and take out the bad guys associated with it and whatnot, you do earn most of the hero points needed to unlock the next chapter, and just have to make up the difference with the side missions. Simple as that. But sometimes a chapter will consist of only a cutscene, that's it, and then you have to earn all the hero points the chapter requires of you, so you can advance to the next, which is really frustrating, and seems like a big waste of time. In fact, this kind of issue was a problem in Treyarch's next Spider-Man game released the following year, Ultimate Spider-Man. I remember that one having a lot more chapters that were like this, just cutscenes, though it did provide you with a bit more to do, which helped alleviate some of the repetitiveness. Something I have yet to mention in this review is the combat system found in Spider-Man 2, and I wanted to discuss it briefly here. While it's got nothing on the Batman Arkham games, it can still be quite addictive. I brought up the fact that you hit the circle button to perform dodges when you need to web up Dr. Octopus's tentacles, but the rest of the combat scenarios play out in a similar way. Counters can be performed with a simple press of the circle button when you see the prompt above Spider-Man's head in the form of his spider sense. You can then do a wide variety of combos to incapacitate your foes, and even utilize web attacks if need be, and can unlock more combos at hero point stores located throughout the city. If you find yourself in a tight jam during combat, you can also activate Spider Reflexes mode by pressing L1. This slows everything down around you, which can give you a much needed advantage in a fight. To replenish your Spider Reflexes meter, all you have to do is perform a variety of acrobatic moves, trick jumps, fancy web swings, that sort of thing. Even if you don't focus on filling the meter, you'll find that it will gradually fill up as you play the game. Doing acrobatic moves becomes second nature, and you don't even think about it after a while. There are a few sequences in this game that can be rather challenging though, and you'll want to make sure to have Spider Reflexes in your back pocket when they pop up. Ever since its release in 2004, despite countless other superhero games coming out in the last 16 years, Spider-Man 2 is always praised as one of the greatest superhero games in the genre. Everyone looks back on it with fond memories, and compared to a lot of other superhero, movie-licensed offerings at the time, Spider-Man 2 stood head and shoulders above all the rest. There was no competition. And because of that, because it stood out, I think it helped prolong interest in the title, extend its lifespan, even years after it was released. Spider-Man 2, this movie-licensed game, released back in 2004 in the heyday of the PlayStation 2, earned a lot of respect from the gaming community. For many people, it was the first superhero game that made them go, "Whoa, this shit can actually be good." Compared to a lot of newer superhero games, and with all nostalgia aside, Spider-Man 2 has become rather dated, let's be honest. I think a few of its elements have aged rather poorly. They're not as fun as you might remember, and I do believe, at this point, it is no longer the best Spider-Man game, though I don't really know how many people still regard it as such following the release of Insomniacs in 2018. Though the web swinging can be frustrating at times and the combat even a little unresponsive here and there, it's not perfect, Spider-Man 2 was a lot better than it had any right to be. It accomplished so much at a time when superhero games, especially movie-licensed ones, were in the gutter essentially. The question is Spider-Man 2 still the best movie-licensed superhero game? Maybe. There have been a few other standouts that have come out over the years, but which one managed to adapt their films as effectively as Spider-Man 2 did, and provide us with new context, new ideas? It's a toss-up and easily debatable, but I personally would still go with Spider-Man 2, as of right now.